Wow, Jill, that was lovely. Thank you. Good morning and welcome. Good morning to you out there in cyber world as well. Tomorrow is supposed to be the worst day of the year. That's official. It's the third Monday in January. And from the point of view of finance, from the point of view of health, from the point of view of people's sense of personal fatigue and depression, it's supposed to be the very worst. But are we daunted? No, we are not. So I ask you, and I ask everybody out there as well, do you have something that you'd like to tell us this morning? Is there something heavy that you're carrying which might be lighter if you shared it? Did you see the sun come up one day and it made you wiser or stronger or happier? Is the goblin of despair or the angel of hope at work in your life today, this very day? Well, this is the time when such things might be brought, and even if we have the will and the courage, be shared among friends. This moment is when we begin again that ancient holy task of looking for ourselves and God by whatever name you want to use. This is our time. Let's not waste it. And so let our chalice flame be sign and symbol of that resolve. Well, Jill and I went through and picked out some hymns, and the first one, and yes, you can sing it to your mask. Just don't blow your COVID germs on anyone else, please. There are no official guidelines about it. And we'll sing number, which is it? 44. Number 44, Give Thanks for Life. Purple Book. I think it was about 10 years ago now, one morning, Christine read something that I asked her to read. And I found it the other day, and it seemed to be very, very pertinent to the moment. These are anonymous contributions by Unitarians collected by some editor, and I don't have that information anymore. All I have is the substance. I'm going to read them to you, and these are about personal experiences. In 1956, at the age of 23, my husband and I were walking the cliff path from St. Ives in Cornwall to Zinot. It was a bright sunny day in September, bright but not a garish midsummer sun. My husband was walking his usual 40 yards ahead and disappeared over the brow of a hill. So to all intents and purposes, I was entirely alone. Although there was no mist, the light seemed suddenly white and diffused, and I experienced the most incredible sense of oneness, and at the same time knew what it was all about, it being existence itself. Of course, seconds later, I hadn't the faintest idea what it was all about. However, it struck me that the oneness was in part explained by the sensation that the air and space and light was somehow tangible. One could almost grasp it, so that there was not a space which stopped because my human form was there, but that my form was merely a continuity of the apparently solid space. The experience was unbelievably beautiful, and I will never forget the quality of that bright white light. And that's anonymous, and she's not alone. Here's another. In utter disillusionment with self and church, I came to the end of my tether. In a state of intense inner wretchedness, of such intensity that my mind seemed on the point of breaking, I got up at 4 a.m. and began wandering aimlessly in the wooded hillside. This went on for some time until unexpectedly the words of Psalm 130 sounded clearly in my mind. And plenteous redemption is ever found in him, and all his iniquities he, Israel, shall redeem. With those words, light seemed to envelop me, and there flowed into my desolate heart such a flood of love and compassion that I was overwhelmed by the weight of it. I was stricken by such wonder and amazement that I burst into tears of joy. It seemed to flow through my whole being with a cleansing and healing virtue. From that moment, I knew that love was the nature of reality. We're not quite finished. I've got another one. I was sitting one evening listening to a Brahms symphony. My eyes were closed, and I must have been completely relaxed, for I became aware of a feeling of expansion. I seemed to go beyond the boundary of my physical self. Then an intense feeling of light and love uplifted and enfolded me. It was so wonderful. It gave me such an emotional release that tears streamed down my cheeks. For several days, I seemed to bathe in its glow, and when it subsided, I was free from all my fears. I didn't feel happy about the world situation, but seemed to see it from a different angle. So with my personal sorrow. I can truly say that it changed my life and the subsequent years have brought no dimming of that experience. These are experiences which many people, perhaps most people, perhaps if you really examine it, everybody has from time to time. But they don't know what to do with it. And so here's what Ronnie or Maria Rilke, one of my favorite poets, says. He says, that is at the bottom of only courage demanded of us, to have courage for the most strange, the most singular, the most inexplicable that we may encounter. That mankind has in this sense been cowardly, has done life endless harm. The experiences that are called visions, the whole so-called spirit world, death, all those things that are so deeply akin to us, have by daily parrying been so crowded out of life that the senses by which we might have grasped them are atrophied, to say nothing of God. Yeah, I'm sure that if I went around and talked to each one of you long enough, similar experiences would come up. And then we would be stuck with having to decide what they mean and what they mean for the rest of our lives. Lowell, do you feel like singing? I feel like listening.
Love is something if you give it away, give it away, give it away. Love is something if you give it away, you end up having more. Now love is like a magic penny, hold it too tight, you won't have any. Lend it, spend it, and you'll have so many, they'll roll all over the floor. Love is something if you give it away, give it away, give it away. Love is something if you give it away, you end up having more. Now let's go dancing till the break of day. If there's a piper, well, we can pay, 'cause love is something, if you give it away, you end up having more. Love is something if you give it away, give it away, give it away. Love is something, if you give it away, you end up having more. Now money is dandy, we like to use it. Love is better if you don't abuse it. It's a treasure, you'll never will lose it if you don't lock up your door. Love is something if you give it away, give it away, give it away. Love is something if you give it away, you end up having more, and more, and more, and more, and more, and more, and more. I was always happy when I learned that Malvina Reynolds didn't start writing songs until she was 65 years old. And she wrote that one. Good song, isn't it, eh? Nice little song.
That means some of us, very few, still got time. Or have we? Yeah. Thank you, Lowell. That was great. When Christine read that thing that I just read again to you, that first of those experiences, it started a conversation among some of us. We were at that time having afternoon circles and having discussions and so on. It was about a moment in which the ordinary experience of living gives way to something else that is also always there. And I just thought that in this time, which is rumored to be the worst time of the whole year, in the middle of a pandemic, with really not very appetizing weather, that all of us could use a bit of a trip into this other side of things. Theologians write books, and gurus and modern-day prophets set out programs of enlightenment for us in order to generate this sort of insight. All that can seem to be over our heads. It seems to require a degree of intelligence or self-awareness is far too complex to even begin on. But you see, I think that the wisdom I'm talking about isn't over our heads at all. I think if it's anywhere, it's under our heads. It's too common for us even to remark upon. A few years ago, I came across this poem by Wordsworth. It stuck in my mind. You know, Wordsworth was a guy who had a lot of experiences like this. In fact, he even wrote a series of poems called Intimations of Immortality. He wrote this poem, and it says, "There are in our existence spots of time that with distinct preeminence retain a renovating virtue, whence depressed by false opinion and contentious thought, or aught of heavier or more deadly weight in trivial occupations, and the round of ordinary intercourse, our minds are nourished and invisibly repaired. A virtue by which pleasure is enhanced, that penetrates, enables us to mount when high, yet more high, and lifts us up when fallen." And despite the sort of stilted, old-fashioned nature of that language, you can tell that he's talking about something like we just read. What are these little spots of time? We're talking about brief moments when the muddle of our thoughts and preoccupations give way to a state of calm, you might even say joyous awareness. They can occur when somebody says or does something. They can occur while viewing a mountain sunrise or a walk by the sea. Sometimes they can occur in times of great stress when they appear as a clear rescue from unbearable circumstances. They appear like a kind of a rope down a dark well. And sometimes we hear it in music, and sometimes they just happen by themselves. The theologian Karen Armstrong relates them to the Greek word ekstasis, which is ecstasy or ecstaticness, which means to step outside yourself. Now, it means to step outside yourself. What on earth can that mean? How can you step outside yourself? They're talking about the very same thing here, moving from the small self to another point of view, which also represents your nature, who you are, but which isn't tied to the limits that we normally impose on ourselves. Some people might refer to that as the ego, but ego just means I am in Latin. And to me, at least, those moments of ecstasis seem also to be who I am. So it's the rule that real revelation about life doesn't happen, or at least doesn't always happen, in the big events, like Elijah hiding in his cave, fleeing from his enemies, Not all of us are present at the occasion of great storms and earthquakes and infernos, but all of us have the ability sometimes to hear a whisper of the truth. Or maybe just a comforting intuition that there is truth somewhere to be heard in our ordinary pedestrian lives. Well, I have related this event before. I'm going to do it again without shame, because for me it's a key moment in my life. I was minister at our church in Kensington, and as a kind of a routine thing, I was visiting an elderly member of the congregation in her flat. And the purpose, presumably, was to arrange for her funeral. But we didn't do that. We just sat around all day and told jokes and told stories. And she served me little pastries. She was Austrian, Viennese pastries, and lovely coffee. And I was there till it started to get dark. I said, gee, I better go. And I stood up and headed for the door, and she said, just one more thing. She said, do you believe in life after death? Now, first of all, that's strange, because why would you ask a minister of religion if they believed in life after death? You might assume, if you didn't know Unitarians well, that the answer would be, what? Of course. But it wasn't like that. But it triggered something in me, and I heard myself saying, yeah, I do. And I think we're already living it. And I was dropped without warning into one of those little spots of time. It was as if these little tumblers had all just fallen together like this. In that moment, the door had swung open. We were both startled. I was startled for having said it. She was startled for having heard it. Here's what I said. I believe that who we really are has always existed, before our birth, during our lifespan, and after we die. I think the reason we don't realize it while we live is because we're too busy being merely ourselves, too stuck in the details of the plot to really understand and to feel being everybody and everything, which is what we truly are. I think that's the reason for prayer and meditation and, yes, poetry. It puts us just that little bit in touch with our real selves. I think it's the only valid reason for what's called ethics and morality, when doing harm to others is actually doing harm to a version of yourself. And I think people like Jesus and the Buddha remind us of our true selves, and this is why we have deified them. And I think that what we call love is a visible sign of that invisible reality. Loving is itself the feeling of the underlying oneness of everything. Well, that's what I said, or something like that. I said it in a rush. For me, the word ecstasis, as used by Karen Armstrong, means being in touch with a self that is, in fact, you. In fact, more you than you are, if you know what I mean. A self that isn't normally accessible to us as we go about buying cabbage or ironing shirts or even going to church. The search, you might say, that longing to be engaged with this truer version of ourselves is what turns us in the first place toward religious activities, makes us write songs, go hiking, fall in love. And the absence of this contact is what makes us unhappy, creates our attempts at diversion, forms our addictions, our obsessions, and our neuroses. We lurk in this self-created story about ourselves, and we anchor it down with the trivia of daily life. We find friends who'll co-conspire with us in making everything be normal, because that somehow seems safer. We'll do almost anything to ward off an emergency, even though emergencies often teach us things that we need to know. And by doing so, we make a rather confining nest for ourselves, comfortable in one sense, misery-making in another, and make unlikely the occurrence of those spots of time. So if that's true, what can be done about it? If there is a truer, wiser version of ourselves, how can we invoke it more often? How can we learn to live in it? Well, there are all sorts of ways that have been passed down through the ages by great thinkers and sages, all the religious traditions. But I think the real expert on finding that still small voice, that spot of time, isn't the author of a spirituality paperback. The real expert is you, yourself. It's a bit like that old game of hot and cold. You remember that game? You're looking for an object and everybody's agreed where it is, and when you get closer to it, people say you're getting warmer, you're getting warmer, you're getting warmer. When you move away from it, you're getting colder, until you finally get it. If you play hot and cold with yourself, you might find what you're looking for. It does require the honing of your attention, but it's probably surefire in the long run. So if long hikes up mountain trails don't work for you, don't do it. If drinking carrot juice and making your body flexible doesn't work, don't do that. If going to church and listening to sermons doesn't help, don't do that either. I don't know what works for you, and I'm not 100% sure yet what works for me, but one thing I can say, remembering those little spots of time, remembering that they exist, knowing that that is possible, is a kind of a path by itself. And more than that, expecting them to occur at any minute, going around as always with a certain little, the Quakers next door have this little phrase they use, a stop in the mind. I know some people who remember one of the names of God every time they look at their wristwatches. That's useful. I remember if we could keep the attention ready to experience the truth, that it would happen. But what makes me want to sing and laugh, however, isn't the thought that I could one day live in the full awareness of my real self. No, I think that's pretty damn unlikely. I've lived this long and it hasn't happened yet, so I'm not looking forward to that. What thrills me is this, because I have had my own little spots of time, because I have for a moment seen beyond this to something else that also is, because I know that it's possible to see beyond this ponderous form of reality that demands center stage. I know that when I finally run out of ideas and projects, ways of protecting myself from illness and old age, I'm going to inherit that reality, which is just so damn hard to see from here. Well, those moments are a real comfort. But I don't think we have to spend all our time looking for them. For me, it's enough to know that that reality that I have occasionally barely glimpsed exists, and to know that when all is finished, it's what's waiting for me. And by the way, that's why I always seem to be saying the same thing from up here in the witness box. Everything is all right. Nothing is broken. Everything is just exactly like it was supposed to be. And nothing and nobody is lost. Amen. Jill, we skipped right over a hymn in the middle. But we're not going to do two now, are we? Which one do you want to do? You want to do? Huh?
And reflection.
I know about that, but I've decided to pass on that. Yeah. So, which one do we want to do? That
You want some?
What a Friend We Have in Jesus one? Number 210, your purple book. When the Song of Life is Ringing. The If we have been touched by something this morning, now is the time to show it by taking back to the world of winding paths and blind alleys the strengthened resolve of our hearts. And we can begin by looking after one another and keep on doing it until we meet again. Amen.